end up at the Alamo and will lose his life. Well, for 13 days, Santa Anna's 4,000 Mexican forces laid siege on the Alamo, and they refused to surrender. What do I mean by they laid siege? Cannon fire, trying to get them to, walk out. Okay? But they refused to do so. So for 13 days, Santa Anna's 4,000 Mexican forces laid siege to the Alamo. The Texans, although vastly outnumbered, like 4,000 to 200, refused to surrender. They didn't attack them, they just laid siege to them. They just fired cannonballs in there and threatened that we're going to come in if you don't quit. They did that for about 13 days, and they would not. The Americans stood fast. Well, finally, on March 6th of 1836, Santa Anna got tired of waiting, and Mexican forces attacked the fort. March 6th, 1836, Santa Anna got tired of waiting, and Mexican forces attacked the fort. All men inside the Alamo were killed, with the exception of male children and 3 slaves and some male couriers. So all the men inside the Alamo were killed, with the only survivors being wives and children of the fallen militia, couriers, remember their messengers, and 3 slaves. Wiped out to a man, with the only survivors being the wives and children of the fallen militia, a few couriers, and 3 slaves. Now, we never know exactly how many were in there. Historic documents state 189 were killed in the attack. Mexican accounts state more than 250 deaths. So you get the picture, somewhere in that vicinity. But all of the men serving the military and all the men serving the militia were killed to a man. The only survivors, women and children of the militia, couriers, and 3 slaves. One of the first men to fall during the attack was William Travis. He was shot in the head with a .75 caliber musket ball from a British rifle owned by the Mexican Army. So William Travis is one of the first to fall at the wall. He is shot in the head with a .75 caliber musket ball. That's a pretty big musket ball. From a British rifle that was owned by the Mexican Army. So William Travis was among the first casualties. James Bowie actually got very, very sick. And nobody knows the exact accounts, but he either died before the battle or during the battle of illness, or was bayoneted to death or shot as he lay in bed. He was very, very ill at the time of the attack. Davy Crockett among the deceased. Unless you watch the movie The Alamo, in which it gives a little different spin at the end. Which, who knows? I mean, you don't know. This is one of these things, when everybody's killed to a man, you only get to take which side's accounts to be true. The winners, right? Battle of Little Bighorn. Everybody killed to a man. Nobody knows what happened to Custer Hill, because nobody survived, okay? We always have a little bit of a mystery. That was the next conflict. The 4th conflict after the Alamo was at Goliad. The 4th conflict after the Alamo was at Goliad. And this happened on March 27th of 1836. March 27th of 1836. And basically this was not even a fight. A force of Texans were massacred at Goliad. After they surrendered and laid down their arms, they were quickly put to death by the Mexican Army. So they were quickly overrun at Goliad. And even though they surrendered and put down their arms, the Mexican Army executed them to a man. They were getting a little bit nasty at this point. So on March 27, 1836, a force of Texans were massacred at Goliad after they had surrendered and laid down their arms, quickly being put to death by the Mexican army. All right, the fifth conflict is the most important. We'll try to get this explained to you. It was the Battle of San Jacinto. San Jacinto. The Battle of San Jacinto. Now, I got to set this up a little bit first, and you don't really have to write this down. Sam Houston was accumulating forces to try to put a big victory over Santa Anna, because he thought the preservation of Texas for those people was the most important thing. So the controversy came. Do you think you think the Alamo just sat there and took it, or do you think they sent couriers out to Houston to say, "Hey, we're in trouble here"? What do you think? Certainly did. Certainly sent couriers out, and they got the news. But why didn't Sam Houston rush the troops that he had, because he was still accumulating? Why didn't he rush the troops he had to the Alamo at their defense?
They all would have been killed.
Absolutely, they'd have been. I mean, they would have been slaughtered to a man. It was 4,000 to 200. He certainly didn't have 3,800 people at his disposal at that point. He was still accumulating them because he wanted to get a big-time victory to win Texas's independence. And man, oh man, can you imagine being in that position? Because all of these people wanting to do what?
Go fight now.
Rush to the Alamo and help those people out. And he refuses to do that, not because he doesn't want to help them, but he knows that if he rushes to the Alamo, they're going to be wiped out to a man, and he believes that Texas is the most important thing to secure. Unfortunately, there's going to be casualties of war in this thing. And so he really takes a lot of heat at the start, because he continues to move his men and accumulate men, because he wants to have this final battle to defeat Santa Anna. Well, finally, that battle occurs on April 21st of 1836. April 21st of 1836. About a month and how long after the Alamo? A couple of weeks, about 6 weeks after the Alamo. On that date of April 21st, 1836, Texans, led by President Sam Houston, attacked Mexican forces at San Jacinto. On April 21st, 1836, Texans, led by President Sam Houston, attacked Mexican forces at San Jacinto. As Houston rallies his men into battle against the Mexicans, they enter the battle with the famous cry, "Remember the Alamo." So as the Americans run into battle, Houston is motivating his troops, gives them kind of a pep talk, for lack of a better term. And as the Americans run into battle against these Mexicans, they're yelling the famous battle cry, "Remember the Alamo." You know how long it took Houston, the Texas militia, to destroy Santa Anna's Mexican forces? How long they fought?
Hour and a half.
18 minutes. 18 minutes. That's how prepared Houston was. 18 minutes. The Texas militia destroyed Santa Anna's forces in 18 minutes. Took them completely by surprise. Santa Anna had actually divided his forces, not knowing that Houston was there at San Jacinto. He divided his forces, but who was Houston interested in defeating? The Mexican army, with who there? Santa Anna. So they attack and they destroy Santa Anna's Mexican forces in 18 minutes. After the battle, a secret treaty was signed, resulting in the following three things. Secret treaty is never good because nobody ever has to honor it later, but we'll see. So this secret treaty that was signed after the Battle of San Jacinto resulted in the following three things. Who was captured, by the way? Yeah, so one of the things on this secret treaty is they released Santa Anna.
That number one.
Yep, they released his Santa Anna. The second thing is Santa Anna was to use his influence to make Mexico recognize Texas's independence. Santa Anna was to use his influence with the Mexican government so that the Mexican government would recognize the independence of Texas. So Santa Anna was to use his influence to convince the Mexican government to recognize the independence of Texas. And the third thing up here on the map is the Rio Grande River right here was to be the border between southern Texas and Mexico. Okay, the Rio Grande River would be the southern boundary separating the independent state of Texas from Mexico. Now, what would be the next action if you were the Lone Star Republic that you would do? What would be your next bit of action once you believed that you had your independence recognized from Mexico and you had a distinct border between that republic and Mexico? What might be the next thing Sam Houston might do politically? Well, what's he want? He wants some, he didn't want to have to but he thinks this thing's over. What's he going to have to do to keep Texas independent? What would be his best bet now that he's gotten it? No. No. Remember, Texas is a republic, not a.
State.
So what's he do?
He's gotta make it a state.
He petitions. The Lone Star Republic petitions the United States to bring in that Lone Star Republic of Texas into the Union as a slave state. This is where we're going to first talk about slave states versus free states, which is eventually going to lead us to a civil war. So at this point, the Lone Star Republic, thinking that Mexico has given them their independence, thinking that the Rio Grande River is the new boundary between Texas and Mexico, they petitioned to join the United States as a slave state. And this is like in 1836-ish, 37-ish, okay? Well, this petition caused strong opposition for two reasons. This petition by the Lone Star Republic to come into the United States as a slave state caused strong opposition for two reasons. Now, don't write this down, but just get this in your head a little bit. There's a big issue right now in this country concerning slave states and free states, because if you have more slave states than you do free states, who controls Congress?
Slave states.
The slave states. And so that was one of the big concerns, is if we brought Texas into the Union as a slave state, that would increase Southern influence in Congress. So who's opposing this? Northerners or Southerners? Northerners. So the first reason why there's such strong opposition to Texas coming in is that Northerners say, gee, if we let Texas come in as a slave state, that's going to give more influence to the South in Congress. Now, this is where we're going to first talk about trying to keep this even. The idea behind this is have the same number of free states as slave states to keep the balance in Congress even, because if there's one more free state than slave state, then the North controls and the South is upset, and vice versa. Does that make sense? And you're going to see this from now on. What might be another reason that you would not, if you were Northerner or Southerner, that you wouldn't want to bring Texas into the Union?
Well, then you gotta protect it.
Well, you're going to protect it. Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. What's going to happen? Because really, does Mexico really say, yeah, it's okay, you're independent? That was supposed to be the deal in the secret treaty. So a lot of Americans thought, if we brought Texas into the Union as either slave or free, what's it going to result in? War with Mexico. Okay? So, again, the Lone Star Republic petitions to join the United States as a slave state. This petition by the Lone Star Republic causes strong opposition. Number one, Northerners in Congress feared that the admission of Texas into the Union would increase Southern influence in Congress. And number two, other citizens feared that to admit Texas into the Union would invite a war with Mexico, who did not really or officially recognize Texas's independence. On a side note, it won't be until 1845 that Texas comes into the Union. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. It will not be until 1845, so several years after their petition to come in, it will take for them to actually get in. Okay, that'll take us to our last subtopic of the day, which is the presidential election, the election of 1844. This election will determine whether we go to war or not, probably with Mexico. The election of 1844. What was the major campaign issue? Close. Whether Texas was going to come into the Union or not. That was the major campaign issue. Should we let Texas come in as a slave state? Now, there were three political parties in this particular election with three different presidential candidates. What party still isn't back in action? Republican. They're still not in it. They still aren't in it. So the Whig Party's still in it. And guess who they nominate? This is kind of weird. He's a Republican, but they nominate him because he's a good politician. Andrew Jackson's archenemy, Henry Clay. Very good. So the Whig Party are going to nominate Republican Henry Clay. Now, what are they going to do concerning the issue of Texas? They're going to avoid the issue. They're not going to talk very much about it. They're not going to get involved in a debate about it. They're going to be neutral. So, the Whig Party nominates Henry Clay, and they avoid the issue of Texas. The new Liberty Party nominates James G. Birney. The Liberty Party nominates James G. Birney, and they will campaign against both slavery and bringing Texas into the Union. The Liberty Party will nominate James G. Birney, and they will campaign against both slavery and bringing Texas into the Union. The third party, the Democratic Party, as we know, will nominate James K. Polk for the presidency. They are pro-slavery and they support bringing Texas into the Union. The Democratic Party,
Republican.
no, no Republican Party. The Democratic Party is pro-slavery. They will support Texas coming into the Union, and they nominate James K. Polk. So you've got the Whig Party, who avoids the issue of Texas, nominating Henry Clay. The Liberty Party, against slavery and against Texas coming into the Union, nominating James G. Birney. And the Democratic Party, pro-slavery and supporting Texas into the Union, nominating James K. Polk.
So I'm guessing the Democrats won.
They did. Polk gets 170 electoral votes. Henry Clay gets 105. Those are the top two. So James K. Polk, this fellow right here, gathers 170 electoral votes to that of 105 for Henry Clay, and James K. Polk becomes the nation's 11th President of the United States.
How many electoral votes did you get?
Yeah, it was 170 to 105. Now, what was the year of this election?
44.
When does the president get inaugurated?
45.
Okay, just before Polk is inaugurated in 1845, what happens?
Texas becomes.
Texas is admitted into the Union as a slave state. So just prior to President-elect Polk's inauguration in 1845, Congress votes to admit Texas into the Union. Now this is an issue, because when Texas comes into the Union, the slave states in the United States outnumber the free states by 2. Now this is in your notes where we're going to start keeping score, because from now until Civil War, we're going to keep score. And right now, slave states have a 2-0 advantage over free states. And that was a concern. So what did Congress do to get rid of that concern? They admitted Iowa into the Union in 1846 and Wisconsin into the Union as in 1848, both coming in as free states to balance it up. So, with the admission of Texas, the slave states in the United States outnumbered the free by 2 states. This balance was restored by Congress first in 1846 when Iowa came in as a free state, and then 1848 when Wisconsin came in as a free state. That'll take us to our next subtopic tomorrow, the war with Mexico. Who's going to push for war? President James K. Polk. Why did he do that? What did he want out of that? The independence of